Okay, hi everybody. Thank you for joining and welcome to our online panel discussion focusing on contemporary development. So the landscape of global contemporary development is rapidly changing. So we thought as a team that there was no better time than to run an event like this one for you today. So I'm joined by a fantastic panel today. So we have our Melbourne Course Director, Dr. Violeta Schubert, and we also have our Manchester course co-director, Dr. Natalie Cunningham. So today our panel are going to share with you their thoughts, knowledge and opinions on the topic of contemporary development and contemporary leadership. Now, we'd like this session to be really informative, but as always, we'd want this session to be interactive. So if you have any thoughts or questions throughout the session today, please submit them in the chat function if you're listening live so that we can gain an insight into your perspective too. Now that leads me quite nicely onto the second slide. So we want to pitch this question to you as our audience today. So we want you to start thinking about the question that you have on your screen in front of you. So think about what are the current challenges do you think leaders are facing in development? So like I said, we want this session to be interactive. So we really want to hear from you as our listeners and hopefully as our prospective students. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to our fantastic panel, but just to let you know, this session is recorded and I'll send the recording out to you today so you can listen back to all of the good stuff our panel, Natalie and Vicky, speak today about. So Natalie and Vicky, over to you.
Thank you so much. I'm going to tell you a little bit about our first module, and then Vicky will also tell you a little bit about our second module before we get into the discussion. But the first, perhaps we can go to the second slide. And the first module is contemporary development, and we're really excited. The program, as you know, launches on the 1st of March. And this is the module that we launch with. And what we do in this module is we actually contextualize what is happening in development. Our course designer on this module and lecturer is Dr. Rory Stanton. And Rory has extensive experience in the field of development. And what he looks at is how does the landscape, the global landscape, affect the context of current development? And one of the things we're going to look at today is simply what has happened with COVID and how it's showing and shaping the global landscape. Access to vaccine, what is happening there in terms of there's less access in Africa than there is in Europe and Asia to the vaccine. So we'll be looking at some of the kind of context of how development is shaped. He'll look at key development theories. And the way that we work is we don't want to share any one paradigm. So we'll be sharing contradictory paradigms. We'll be looking at different approaches, different ways of looking at development. There is the classic South versus North module, model which people use to look at development, but we'll look at other models as well. And then we're going to look particularly at the implications of power and what it means. Where does power lie in development? What are the roles between the different stakeholders, government, international organizations? How do they interplay? Where does it really align? So that's the key theories and the focus. From there, we're going to move to the second unit, which Vicky is going to do, Vicky or Violeta, we call her Vicky. So she's going to tell you a little bit about that in detail, and she's been very immersed in the design. So over to you, Vicky.
Hi, everyone. Lovely to be have this opportunity, and please do send any questions later. The second module is contemporary leadership. And it's a little bit heavy, but I actually think that anyone who's interested in leadership would have to be a very smart cookie and already we have to think about the different ways that leadership has been theorized and the different approaches to how leadership should be done. In development studies, in actual fact, leadership has not been a focus. Most of the time in development, there's been more attention to issues of management, processes, tools and operations, rather than actually having a sound sense, a body of scholarship and examples of where we should go to for leadership. So because of that, in this first module, I spend quite a bit of time cross-disciplinary, colleagues in business, management, sociology, anthropology, across many psychology, looking at the different types of theorizing about leadership and the kind of practice and implications that that has. This thing of exercising influence, the role of situational factors, it's a sort of very generalistic term, but we're covering the different kinds of aspects that enable us to be reflexive leaders, to be thoughtful, to consider issues of values, ethics. What does it entail for us to be influencing and motivating without becoming bad eggs, without making mistakes in leadership? So in the pursuit of understanding different styles and models of leadership in the first part, the second part starts bringing these ideas together in terms of its relevance to development. So what does leadership for development, as well as what leadership in development looks like? What should we be taking note of, and the lessons learned from other disciplines and other practices, and not just our own? So that's the basic framing of it. This unit, the same as with the first unit, they're foundational. They will provide you with the basis upon which we in the course will be doing a lot more practice, a lot more debating, a lot more critical thinking and analysis. And the same as with the first unit, but I can only speak from my point of view. I pay a lot of attention in critical analysis and building up that capacity. So what you would have seen so far is we try to have a coherent, thoughtful process without giving you some kind of normative idea of what you should be doing.
Thanks, Vicky, for that. We're going to raise some of the questions, and we're going to start with one of the, the overriding issue that's happening in all our lives at the moment, and we're going to look at what impact is COVID having on the development space, and so how is it influencing development? And I just want to read a quote that I have, which comes from the Scotland Town Partnership. And they issued a statement. The Chief Officer of Scotland Towns Partnership he says, please think local first. He says, think local, support your local community while we are going through such difficult times. So here's an urge from a context of saying local is most important. We need to be thinking locally. But at the same time, this is a global pandemic. It's impacting everybody globally. And so how do you manage thinking locally and being aware of global implications? What happens in terms of resources? So I mentioned in my introduction that the vaccine, this is countries with more money can access the vaccine easier. Organizations like the World Health Organization come in and make plans. The World Bank is there giving loans, but who actually gets the vaccine? Where is the vaccine at the moment? So we're starting to see inequities playing out as we look at COVID. And this means that we need to rise as leaders. So Vicky, you're focusing on those leadership models. So here's a context. This is just an example of a context of what's happening. What does this mean to lead an organization that is in the development space during times of this think local, but yet they are enhancing further global inequities?
I think that it actually, nice point, Natalie. I think it goes into something that's been a challenge to development. Development has been concerned with localization, if I could call it that, of acting local, grassroots activism, community activism, empowering, capacity building, working with people at the local level. But unfortunately, there's still a long, long way to go. I mean, even in the 2018 World Humanitarian Summit, that act local. Well, one of the phrases of the World Global Summit was as local as possible and as transnational or as global as needed. There's still that feeling of, if we are interconnected, if we are shared humanity, are we able to actually oversee leadership at a global level whilst maintaining, ensuring that we take care of those that are closer to us more locally? And in actual fact, I think it poses a danger. I totally agree that we should focus on local, but if we focus on local too much, we miss the point that these different local points are interconnected. And it's the interconnectedness that I think is a fundamental space. But then again, how global leadership looks like in development has, I think, really shown up with structural fault lines between politics, the politics of development, the kind of nationalistic, populistic fervor, dropping donor aid, the entry of, South to South cooperation, different kinds of countries entering the fray of development, and really what we take for granted. And I think getting back to the pandemic, maybe that's the biggest lesson that we're learning in development. And speaking with a lot of development leaders from across different organizations, what they're finding, I think, is it reaffirms the things that we knew were not so good. But it's how we find opportunity from the fact that the things that we sort of know we've just cruised through, we haven't attended to.
No, absolutely, Vicky. I think, for me, you hit the word when you were talking about the interconnectedness. That is what it has highlighted, is that everything is interconnected and we cannot separate that interconnectedness. And so one of the key challenges, and you spoke about the political, what is happening politically. And I know here in the UK, the government has made a decision to reduce its percentage of investment in development because of the giving attention to the issues in the country and supporting people. And so they've taken the UK government has been really good historically in terms of making sure some of its budget went to development. And now that amount has been reduced. And so what you would need to do as a leader in an organization or as a country is balance meeting your own need, but also recognizing that potentially if you were from a country that was getting some investment, just in this example from the UK government, you need to be able to influence that. And so one of the jargon words that are thrown around a lot is, multilateral stakeholder analysis, so we're always talking about, how do we influence the different stakeholders and where is the power and how much power do you have in your organization to influence funders, to influence policy. So what is it that you can do? And we look, and Vicky will be looking at some of these kind of models of what is it about individual leadership versus collective leadership. And, when are you just relying on yourself and what you need to do? And when are you relying on how you can work collectively with your colleagues in an interconnected way? perhaps, Vicky, share what could people do in terms of influence in this time?
Yeah, it's funny. There's some of the paradigms in development that about leadership that really stand out. Most people will talk about, authentic leadership, transformative leadership, and shared leadership. Shared leadership feels actually not simply that, hey, this is such a complex space that we need to work with people, that we can't do it on our own, that our efforts can be very small, but combined we have greater potential. But it's the same as the partnership for development paradigm. I think partnerships are great, but partnerships are not the be all or end all. It's about the nature of those partnerships. And, so if we get into this whole discourse, even the language of stakeholder, who has a stake in something, which is very businessy talk. And I know that you're aware of it, as most of our people that have joined us tonight are, or this morning, if you're in your sphere of the world. The fact is that issues of trust and collaboration, understanding the ethical shared space, but also the no-go zones, in other words, authenticity. Are there some spaces of code of action that we cannot cross at any point, irrespective of where the money's coming from or how many different. I worked quite a while ago on a project that involved cross-sectorial partnerships. And one of the Indigenous elders said something that has stuck, and I've probably used it a bit too much with my students in giving them a prior warning. What he said was that when you have really powerful banks, corporations, federal governments, state, local governments, when they come to you in your community, they are inviting you to their table. You're sitting at their table. So, having multiple stakeholders or multiple partners doesn't mean everyone's equal. In fact, it can and often reaffirms the inequality.
Vicky, yeah, absolutely. As you were talking about that, it triggered a memory for me. I did some work in Botswana, and I was approached by the head of a mining company because the mine wanted to acquire land, and they wanted to engage with the community. And he asked me, how do I, wants to engage fairly and justly, and they had a policy that they had to reimburse, and I'm just going to use arbitrary figures. These are not, but let's say they were going to reimburse for acquisition of land for mining at $100 an acre or whatever it was. And the government was taking land for agricultural purposes and reimbursing at $10 an acre. So there was a great inequality. And he said, I don't know what to do because we follow the World Bank and Development Bank guidelines. And this is what we've been told to do. Anyway, after a lot of lateral thinking and brainstorming, we ended up coming up with a solution where the mine took their $100 and they gave $40 to the local government. And the government was then able to acquire land at $50 because they had their own $10 and they used the 40, and they paid 50, but they had to work with changing the World Bank policy, the power authority. And this is just, and then they had to engage the community and not tell them. And so it was a very cooperative, collaborative. It took a long time. I'll share it here in a minute, but it was challenging the norms because we are doing best practice. We are doing what, and that was a business example in this instance. So I think the inequality is just perpetuated often by the people who hold the power. And as leaders, if you don't understand how you can influence and play with the power dynamics, you get sucked into paying the $100 or whatever.
It's a very fine example, and it does speak to that whole issue of inequity. I find that in development there is so much good intent. Well, there's also the career element, that you follow processes, that you do the things as you're expected to do in various contexts, and it becomes, and I think this is where a course such as this, where you start being critical thinking, you critically think about development and leadership, and don't just leave it as some kind of normative frame. This is what we're going to do, and this will achieve this, or in the hope that it will achieve this. I think often we had a panel discussion at Melbourne not that long ago in development studies, and we asked these different CEOs and heads, seniors of various international organizations and local organizations, how do you navigate, muddy, troubled waters? How do you bypass to find new routes whilst maintaining your values and ethics? Yeah. And I think that is that example. If it's not about whether we do shared leadership or authentic leadership or ethical leadership, I don't think there is a one size fits all, but that ability to be flexible and to actually pay attention to the social actors, to the social context, rather than trying to find some trope answers, in manuals, or, even though they're very helpful sometimes in multilateral agencies that are not necessarily understanding of the context and the relationships that are happening.
I think, and I just looked at the chat that is on, and a point's been raised that this is further perpetuated by the changes that's happening in our climate, and and particularly disasters that are happening, natural disasters in terms of droughts, floods, sustainable challenges in communities with agriculture. And so this whole area to think about, they use, complex problems and wicked problems, and understanding all that. But what we really have to do, and so the program is equipping you with, as Vicky says, a lot of thinking skills, a lot of paradigms, a lot of frameworks, so that when you come up with those challenges, you don't go in and say, okay, well, I'm going to go with this model, but what do I need to do? Where could I draw on it? And so we get a lot of interaction happening amongst the program. We've got a lot of videos as well with key leaders who've influenced things. So drawing on Melbourne University's, expertise in the development space, at the Global Development Institute, where our program, we've got access to all kinds of people, and we are drawing on these people, and you'll have videos put in, and you'll have talks with them or assignments. So we are hoping that through this engagement, we start to look at how can we really make a sustainable difference to contemporary development. Vicky, perhaps you want to end with a closing statement?
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. One of the nicest things that I actually read quite recently, you might have guessed I like reading in my academic role, was that it is absolutely fine for development actors, those concerned with development. They may not be development actors, but want to contribute in development. We do need to understand processes. We do need to understand the tools that are possible, and how careful consideration of fit for purpose. That language of fit for purpose is constantly used, but it also requires, and this is, I think, Manchester School's wonderful contribution in the space, is you actually need to think of the political elements. To be bold, brave, you have to be a bit disruptive. you know, it's not simply leading. You have to challenge status quo. And if we, sorry, if we are to merely apply some kind of fit for purpose, normative thinking on solutions, we forget that we are there to establish relationships and develop trust and develop genuine interactions that they take time. Relationships take time. Understanding humanity is fundamental to development. And I don't think that we should be looking for just tell me what to do. That has not gotten development very far. In fact, a lot of the criticisms have been around the thing of not learning from the lessons from the past. And we do have that chance. We have the chance to be reflective, to learn from the past, learn from this pandemic. This pandemic absolutely has shown up the structural fault lines, the things that have been left unattended. But it has also human ingenuity, that reconfiguring of relationships. You know, you may not have the large pool of aid, the, you know, shrinking aid. That's absolutely true. You might have political resistance to development, to aid. But, you know, there are multiple paths, multiple ways to consider. And I think that flexibility and openness and ingenuity, because we are interested in humanity and sustainability and rights, fundamentally. Yeah. So,
brilliant. Thank you, Vicky. Thank you, Natalie. Today's session's been really interesting and informative. Now, I'm not sure if you both had a look at the Q&A part of this. Has anyone had a chance to read through?
Yes, I read through now while Vicky was summarising. So maybe I'll just quickly respond to Abhinav's comment and maybe to just share it. So if you look at the Q&A, you can see he talks about the lockdown in India and how initially there was a focus on shop local, good message to think locally, but raises the point, however, if there are innovations and developments taking place in different parts of the world, it needs to be shared with the rest of the world so we can progress as a global community and not just as a local community. Now, I just want to share one of the projects that the Global Development Institute is doing here at Manchester, and they've been, it's a huge project. It's an African cities project where they're looking at development across the different African cities and what you can learn from one African city to another. Now, each one is very, very different. Each African city is totally diverse. But is there anything in terms of planning for water, for health, for education that you can take from one city to another city? And so we have this, it's not global in terms of comparing all cities, but it's an African cities project, not a one city project. So that's an attempt there where we start to look at working as a global community and not just a local community. And then maybe, Vicky, you want to respond to the second one?
I actually, Abhinav, thank you for the second comment. I really like the comments, very thoughtful. Can I say that, as you well noted in your comment, in much of this sort of developing a vaccine seems to have highlighted competitiveness between countries and competitive advantage rather than working collaboratively. You know, a lot of finger pointing, it started there, which is ridiculous. You know, sorry, I'm Macedonian, and my father used to say, well, it's done, now what are you going to do about it? And it's that, what are you going to do about it, that really is highlighted. I think developing a collaborative approach to disease control, there has been some Ebola and a few other things, but definitely I think it is more greatly needed. The problem is, how do you construct influencing things globally between countries without it becoming a politicism? And that politicism is fundamentally, I think, of concern. We've had Millennium Development Goals, Sustainable Development Goals, and yeah, they're wonderful, great concept, but they're shallow in my mind. They're shallow because you can have taglines of success that are not based on foundational work. And then the ongoing work that needs to happen, who does it? Who picks up on it? And there's a lot of wonderful examples of collaborations. And I think that there will be greater shared health space. I mean, I'm doing a lot of projects on psychedelic medicines and the socializing and the democratizing of health. And I've started looking at various areas where there's a lot of indigenous local approaches to health and well-being, and there might be an interest to furthering ideas about vaccines beyond the standard way that we're looking at them.
Great, thank you so much both. That's a really informative session to start my day off. That's starting it off nicely, so thank you. And thank you to all of our listeners. It's great to see some of our future students on joined us today, so it's great to have you. Now, just before we wrap up, I just wanted to kind of explain my role and where this comes into play to help you as prospective students and listeners today. So I am based in the UK, so I'm the Manchester course advisor for the Masters of Leadership for Development, which is a course that's delivered jointly by two amazing institutions, so the University of Manchester and the University of Melbourne. My role essentially is to really support you in the very early stages of your decision-making journey. So my role is to kind of speak with you by email, on Zoom, about your goals and kind of your background and circumstances, so that you feel really ready about kind of taking the next steps and hopefully applying to this fantastic course. Now, our next enrolment date is, like the lady said today, is the 1st of March. But we do also have a second intake, which will be in September. So there's things to think about. Now, you've still got time to apply for our March intake. So there's no time like the present. So please do get in touch with me if you want to discuss your options to start with us in March. But essentially my role is to really kind of offer support and guidance around the course and kind of what we need from you in terms of your application and to kind of make you stand out as a potential student. So thank you, Natalie. Thank you, Vicky, for today. I'll send the recording out to you all so you can have a listen back to the wonderful insights. And we hope to kind of see you on the course either in March or in September. But thanks again and stay safe, everybody.
Get in touch. Yeah. Get in touch if you have any further questions.
And just to add one last point, is the applicants that we're getting are so global. So you will learn a lot from one another because they're from different continents and different perspectives. And so we are really excited about the caliber of our candidates and the global nature of the candidates.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay, thanks,
everyone. Take care.